8 months after the diagnosis took the strength from his right leg, Marcus Wendell Pruett's 3 sons decided one by one in 3 separate phone calls over the span of 11 days that they could not take him in. The girl 2 doors down was 17. She did not know his name yet. She would learn it. The afternoon she watched a cane skitter across his driveway and roll under his truck while he stood there gripping the mailbox with one hand and nothing else to hold on to. She picked up the cane. She walked him back to his porch. She said, "I got you, sir." Then she went home to finish her homework. She did that, in one form or another, almost every day for nearly 2 years. He did not know yet what he would leave her. She did not know yet what he had been building in a metal box in his garage for 31 years. Marcus Pruett spent 31 years repairing small engines out of a cinder block shop on the edge of Tulsa. The kind of place with a hand-painted sign that said WIT, Small Engine Repair, and a bell over the door. That had been broken since 1996. He fixed lawnmowers and chainsaws and the occasional generator. He charged less than he should have. He kept a coffee can on the counter labeled "Tips Appreciated." But mostly what went in that can was loose change from men who didn't have much more than that to give. And Marcus never once counted it before closing time because counting it felt like keeping score. And he did not believe in keeping score. He called everybody Chief. The old men who came in complaining about their trimmers, the teenage boys who brought in their first lawnmower business equipment, the women who showed up flustered because their husbands had passed and they didn't know a spark plug from a carburetor. All of them got Chief, and all of them got the same patience. "Let me show you what's going on under here, Chief." That was how you knew Marcus actually cared about you and wasn't just being polite. He showed you the inside of the thing. He wanted you to understand it, not just pay for it. He made $9 an hour the first 10 years he worked for somebody else, before he saved enough to open his own shop, and even after the shop was his, he never charged what the work was worth. He fixed mowers for free for the Vance Street Baptist Church and never told the congregation. He kept a drawer of loaner weed trimmers for people who couldn't afford to wait a week without one. He did not write any of it down. He did not ask for thanks. He had a habit, every fall, of going out to the trailer parks off Highway 64 and fixing whatever needed fixing on the lawn equipment of the elderly folks out there, free of charge. Because winter came hard in that part of Tulsa, and a working generator sometimes mattered more than people wanted to admit. He retired at 64 because his knees gave him no choice. The shop did not throw him a party. He had planned to keep the sign up even after he stopped working, just so people passing by would still see Pruetts on the building. But the new owner who bought the lot wanted it gone within the month, and Marcus stood in the parking lot one Tuesday morning and watched a man on a ladder unscrew the sign he'd hung up himself in 1993. He did not say anything. He drove home. He spent the rest of that day in his garage, alone, going through 31 years of receipts and tools and small parts in coffee cans, deciding what mattered enough to keep. Under the workbench, behind a stack of paint cans, there was a metal lockbox. His father had given it to him in 1979, the year Marcus turned 22, the year he opened the shop. He had a key for it on his ring, the same ring that held his truck key and his house key, and that lockbox had sat behind those paint cans for longer than some of his customers had been alive. He pulled it out that Tuesday evening. He opened it. He looked at what was inside for a long time. He put it back. He did not open it again for almost 2 years. Marcus had 3 sons. They all left Tulsa in their own way, at their own speed, for their own reasons. None of them left badly. That was what made it harder to talk about later. Dale was the oldest. He left at 23 for an engineering job in Dallas. He had a good head for numbers and a girlfriend who became a wife, who became the kind of woman who planned things 3 years out, including which neighborhoods their kids would grow up in. Dale built a life in a subdivision with a sprinkler system on a timer and 2 cars in the driveway that got washed every other Sunday. He called his father every other week, sometimes a little less, 15 minutes usually. He asked how the knees were holding up. He asked if Marcus needed anything. he said. "I'll get down there one of these weekends." He said some version of that for 11 years. He never came. He meant it every time he said it. Dale was not a bad son. He loved his father in the genuine way a man loves something. He has decided not to look at too closely, because looking at it too closely would have meant admitting how long it had been since he'd actually stood in that garage. Wesley was the middle one. He left at 21 for Houston, where he sold commercial insurance, and got good enough at it to buy a boat he used 4 times a year. He sent his father $250 on the first of every month, automatic transfer, set it up once and never touched it again. He had been doing it for 9 years. He rarely called. The money was the call, in Wesley's mind. That was the whole transaction as far as he understood it. Marcus would text back, "Got it, thank you, son," and Wesley would send a thumbs-up emoji, and that was the relationship, condensed into 2 phone screens once a month. Wesley had never once asked his father what he actually needed. He sent what felt generous to send, and by his own math, it was generous, and it meant almost nothing in the currency that actually mattered, which Wesley had never learned existed. Roy was the youngest. He left last, and he left the hardest. Roy stayed in Tulsa until he was 34. For 4 of those years, from the time Marcus turned 60 until he turned 64, Roy was the only one who showed up. He drove his father to the VA clinic for his knee appointments. He mowed the lawn on Saturdays, which Marcus found privately funny. A man who'd spent his whole life fixing other people's mowers now too stiff to push his own. He sat on the porch with his father in the evenings and listened to the same 4 stories about the shop, the same 4 stories every time, and he laughed in the same places because his father needed someone proud of those stories with him. Dale didn't fly in. Wesley bumped the holiday transfer up by $40. Nobody asked Roy if he was tired. Everybody assumed Roy had it handled, because Roy was there, and being there announced that you had volunteered for the whole job by yourself. By the 4th year, Roy had stopped sleeping right. By the start of the 5th, he was sitting in his car outside his father's house some evenings before he could make himself go in. Not because he loved his father any less, but because nobody could see how worn down he'd gotten, including himself. When his wife's company offered her a transfer to Phoenix, Roy saw a door, and for the first time in 5 years, he let himself walk through one that wasn't built around somebody else's needs. He told his father the Sunday before they left. He could not say it to his face. He said it standing in the kitchen with his back half turned, looking at the window instead of at Marcus. 3 sons, 3 different ways of disappearing. Dale because distance made forgetting feel like nothing personal. Wesley because money was the only language he'd ever been taught for love. Roy because he had carried the whole weight alone for years, and his back had finally said no. Nobody had ever sat the 3 of them down and explained that caring for a parent was a job meant to be split 3 ways, not defaulted onto whichever one happened to still be in town. So they did what people do when nobody teaches them anything. They drifted and sent what they could spare from wherever they'd ended up. And Marcus kept the porch light on every evening out of habit, even after there was nobody left coming up the walk to see it. It happened on a Thursday late March, just past 6 in the evening. Marcus was out at the mailbox the same trip he made every day at the same time, when his right leg simply stopped cooperating. It did not buckle dramatically. It just quit answering. He reached for the mailbox post to catch himself and missed it by an inch, and his cane went skating out across the driveway and under the bumper of his own truck, and Marcus ended up sitting hard on the asphalt with his bad leg folded wrong underneath him and no way to get back up. He did not call out. He had never been a man who called out. He sat there in the gravel dust at the edge of his driveway, 66 years old, looking at his own cane lying just out of reach under the truck, and he thought, with a kind of flat clarity, that this was probably how it was going to be from now on. 2 doors down, in the brick house with the basketball hoop nobody used anymore, a girl named Joellen Maris's Caro was coming up her own driveway with a backpack over one shoulder when she saw him sitting there. She was 17. She did not know his name. She knew him only as the old man with the cane, who waved sometimes when she walked past, the one whose porch light came on every night like clockwork. She crossed 2 yards without thinking about it. She got down on her knees in the gravel beside him and asked if anything was broken, and when he said no, just his pride, she laughed despite himself, which surprised them both. She got the cane out from under the truck. She got her shoulder under his arm and counted to 3 out loud the way you do with somebody you're trying to help, feel less helpless, and between the two of them, they got him standing. She walked him to his porch steps, slow, matching his pace instead of her own, and she did not let go of his arm until he was sitting down safely. "I got you, sir," she said. "Appreciate it," he said. "Most folks would have just walked on by and pretended they didn't see." "I saw," she said. Then she picked her backpack back up off his lawn, where she'd dropped it, and went home to finish her homework, and that, as far as she was concerned, was the end of it. It was not the end of it. The next afternoon, she was outside his house again at the same hour. Not because anyone asked her to, but because some part of her had spent all day wondering whether he'd made it back inside okay the night before. She knocked. He answered slow, leaning hard on the cane, looking at her through the screen door a moment before he opened it. "You don't have to keep checking on me," he said. "I know," she said. That was the whole conversation. She came back the next day too, and the one after that. By the second week, she'd started walking the half block to his house, on her way home from school instead of going straight to her own. And she never told anybody at school she was doing it, the same way she never posted it anywhere. Because, to her, it wasn't a thing that needed announcing, just a thing that needed doing. In the fall, she noticed the wheelchair ramp the VA had built him was already coming loose at one corner where the plywood had started to rot from rain pooling underneath. She didn't mention it. She came back the following Saturday with a hand drill she'd borrowed from her own father's garage and a box of deck screws she'd bought herself for $6 at the hardware store on Mingo Road. She pulled the loose board, found the rot underneath, went back for a replacement piece of treated lumber and fixed it herself over the course of an afternoon, while Marcus sat in a porch chair and supervised in a way that mostly amounted to him telling her stories about engines she only half understood. When she finished, she stood on the ramp and bounced on it twice to test it. It held. "That thing's been wobbling since the truck pulled out of here," Marcus said. 2 years. 2 years, and you never said a word about it to the VA? Didn't seem worth the trouble of calling." "It is now," she said, and he laughed, a real one, the kind that came up from somewhere lower in his chest than a polite laugh usually did. It was the second time he'd laughed like that since the diagnosis. After that, Saturday afternoons became a fixture. She'd come by around 4, after her shift bagging groceries at the Reacers on 71st. And he started making instant coffee for the both of them, 2 mugs, because that was the only hot beverage he knew how to make, and she never told him she didn't really care for instant coffee. They'd sit at his kitchen table, and he'd tell her about engines, about the shop, about the trailer park families he used to drive out to every November before winter hit. She told him about school, about her mother working double shifts at the hospital, about a boy named Desmond she'd liked for 2 years, and never said more than 6 words to. He taught her how to change her own oil that winter, walking her through it in the driveway, with his bad leg, propped on an overturned bucket, calling out instructions while she did the actual work because his hands had gotten too unsteady to trust with the wrench anymore. He told her about the importance of doing things right the first time so you didn't have to do them twice. She learned to listen for what he wasn't saying, the way he'd go quiet, sometimes mid-sentence about his sons, and just let the silence finish the thought for him. In the spring of the second year, on a Saturday with the coffee going cold between them, she asked him carefully whether his boys ever came around. He looked at his mug for a long moment. "Dale calls," he said. "Wesley sends money. Roy used to come by, before Phoenix. That's not the same as coming around." "No," he said, "it is not." That night, after she'd gone home, Marcus went out to the garage. He got down slow the way he did everything now, and he pulled the metal lockbox out from behind the paint cans. He opened it. He took something out, wrote a name and a date on a slip of paper, and tucked it inside with everything else. He locked the box again and slid it back into its hiding place. He did not tell her. He would not open it again for another year. That was also the spring Joellen mentioned, almost offhand, over the cold coffee, that she'd gotten into a community college program 2 towns over for diesel mechanics, the kind of program that could get her certified and working within 2 years, but that her mother couldn't help with the tuition, and the financial aid covered maybe half. She said she figured she'd work a year first, save up, do it later. She said it the way people say things they've already made peace with not getting. Marcus didn't say much in response. He just nodded, the way he did when he was filing something away rather than reacting to it. It was a Saturday in early June when he finally told her to come back to their garage with him. She followed him out, matching his slow pace the way she always did now without thinking about it. He knelt down in front of the workbench, slower than he used to, one hand braced against the wood for balance, and pulled the lockbox free. He set it on the bench. He opened it with the key from his ring. Inside, beneath a layer of old receipts and yellowed photographs, were letters. Dozens of them, in a dozen different kinds of handwriting, some on lined notebook paper, some on the backs of church bulletins, a few typed and printed off computers that must have been new at the time. He lifted out a handful and set them on the bench in front of her. She picked one up. A woman's handwriting, careful and a little shaky. "Mr. Pruett, you fixed my husband's generator the winter he passed, and you never let me pay you a dime. I think about that every winter when the lights stay on." Another, "You taught my son everything he knows about engines, and he's got his own shop now in Bartlesville because of it." Another, "You never made my family feel like charity. You made us feel like neighbors. That's a rarer thing than people know." Joellen read 4 of them before she had to stop and look up at him. "This is what 31 years looked like," Marcus said. "Not the sign they took down, not the party they never threw. This." She nodded. She didn't trust herself to say anything. "There's something else," he said, and reached back into the box. Underneath the letters was a plain envelope from a credit union in Tulsa. His hands shook a little pulling it out. He handed it to her. Inside was a savings account statement. The account had been opened a little over a year and a half earlier, the same spring she'd fixed his ramp, and it carried her name on it. The balance read $51,640. She read the number twice. She set the paper down on the workbench like it might do something unpredictable if she kept holding it. "Mr. Pruett, I can't take this. You already did," he said, 2 years ago, when you got my cane out from under that truck." She looked at the letters scattered across the bench, at the lockbox, at the man standing in front of her with one hand braced on the workbench because his legs weren't steady enough on their own anymore. She thought about her mother working doubles at the hospital. She thought about the diesel program she'd told herself she'd get to eventually. She thought about every Saturday for 2 years, where she'd shown up not because anyone made her, but because it had never once occurred to her not to. "I know," she said. Quieter this time. Different weight than the first time she'd said it. Marcus nodded. That was all the conversation either of them needed. She sat down on an overturned bucket because her legs weren't quite ready to hold her either. And he put a hand on her shoulder, and neither of them said anything else for a while. Out past the open garage door, a car went by on the street, and somewhere a dog barked twice and quit. The letters sat on the bench between them, 3 decades of strangers writing, to say that a man with a broken bell over his door had mattered to them more than he ever let on, and the girl 2 doors down was the one he'd chosen to hand all of it to, because she was the one who had actually shown up. If this made you think of somebody who shows up without being asked twice, send it to them. They probably don't hear it nearly often enough, and it's rarely because people don't appreciate them. It's because the ones who just show up are the hardest people to remember to thank, on account of how they never ask to be thanked in the first place. And if it made you think of somebody you haven't called in a while, don't text them. Call them. There's a difference, and you already know what it is. A text is something you send so you can feel like you did something. A call is something you do because you want the other person to actually feel like they matter to you. The people on the other end of that phone have always known the difference, even when they were too polite to say so. Here's the question this one leaves on the table, and I already know it's going to split the room. Marcus left everything. The lockbox, the letters, the credit union account, every cent of what he had, to a teenage girl 2 doors down. He left nothing to his 3 sons. But one of those sons spent 4 years driving him to appointments and mowing his lawn before he finally broke under the weight of doing it alone. So sit with this. Was Marcus right to leave Roy out along with the other 2? After everything Roy had carried before he had nothing left to carry, or does showing up for 4 years and then needing to stop count for something? That money can't just erase. Is it fair to treat the one who stayed the longest the same as the 2 who never came at all? Or is fairness a word that only belongs to the people who never left in the first place? Leave your answer below. I want to read every single one of them.